Hello, Vladimir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can see you.
Good. Yeah, loud and clear. Now, where are you in Japan?
I'm in Tokyo, Bulgarian living in Tokyo.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And thank you for accepting my invitation. I really appreciate it.
No problem. No problem.
You are an internationally recognized scholar in the field of uh,
Internationally recognized in Japan.
in Japan as well, but worldwide in the field of linguistics and
Not.
teaching methodology.
Oh, yes. It's simply because of publications, probably. So
Yes,
that's
yes. You said in a recent interview that the favorite book that you've written is the one titled "What Should Every what
every
was it?
EFL teacher know.
So my first question is: are you happy with the current state of language teaching?
Uh, I don't think anybody's happy with the current state of how language is taught. I think. I think we know a lot about the learning and teaching of languages now. There's enormous amounts of research. When I did the first edition of my book on vocabulary, what was it, around 2001. Then when I did the second edition in 2013, I figured out that 30% of the research on vocabulary had occurred in the last 10 years. And so when you say, what do I think of the current state of teaching? I think, well, it's still not as strongly research based, but I can see sort of areas where things are improving, such as in extensive reading. Many more people now are aware of the importance of extensive reading as a means of getting input for learning a language.
But you were gracious enough with your time to read my book, and so you are familiar with my strong beliefs. One of which is that language cannot be taught. Well, when we talk about adults, not kids. Adults.
I would probably agree with that to a large degree. I would say that teaching should make up about let me get it right in my head, about 1/16 of the time in a language course, and the other 15/16 should be largely using the language in various ways with support.
So what do you mean by using the language? That's the $1 million question. What does use mean in this context?
It means doing extensive reading.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you again.
Yeah.
99.999% of people by use mean speak. Nobody thinks
wrong.
Read. Nobody thinks about reading. Even dictionaries. Sorry again.
Yeah.
Even dictionaries, if you look up language in a dictionary, they give the most common collocations, and the first one is speak a language. And I think the second one is use a language. And by use, even dictionaries mean speak.
Yeah. Well, they're wrong.
But this is huge. It's like night and day. For most people, language is synonymous with speaking. Virtually nobody associates use with reading or listening. Basically nobody.
That's probably right.
Absolutely nobody.
Yeah, that's probably right. But you must have come across my idea of the 4 strands, yeah? Yeah. Well, you see, the reason I say about 1/16 of the time should be spent on teaching is that I think that the strands of input, output, and fluency development are not teaching. They're simply the teacher organizing things for the learners to do and encouraging learners to do them, such as extensive reading, extensive listening, etc., and so on. And then you've got the language-focused learning strand where the learners can study. They can deliberately learn vocabulary. I'm a great supporter of that because the research is very strong in the positive effect of that. And if you take the language-focused learning strand, about 1/4 of that strand might involve direct teaching by the teacher. Yeah. And
when you say direct teaching, when you say direct teaching, do you mean explaining vocabulary and grammar?
Yes.
There are dictionaries for that, dictionaries and grammar books.
No, but they're not very good. You don't learn grammar. You don't learn useful grammar by reading a grammar book. Teachers can do quite useful things for grammar by teaching very simple rules, for example.
But that's students' number one complaint. And when I say students, I also include adults. Everybody's number one complaint is that there is too much focus on grammar and vocabulary, and reading too.
Yeah, but you see, I'm restricting it to less than. So when I say 1/16 of the course should be teaching, then a part of that 1/16 would be giving attention to grammar. So we're now down to, say, 1/64 of a course. And I've just been, someone asked me to write something about the teaching of grammar, and I thought, I don't really know much about that anyway, but I approach it from a vocab perspective. And it seems to me that there are very basic, useful grammar things that you can do, such as pointing out, say that when you read, when you see English, notice that, the subject and the verb agree in the present tense, and that's something you can just give a little bit of attention to, because it might be non-significant because of your first language, but if you just happen to notice that, and that's not any great grammar teaching in any way, it's a little bit of consciousness raising, and I think that could have a positive effect. But I wouldn't be banking my money on it.
To me, grammar is to language what music theory is to songs. So you don't start with the theory. Instead, you start with your favorite songs and extract the theory from them. And the analogy with grammar is you start with your favorite content and extract the grammar from it. And, and language teachers have to explain how learners can do that by themselves.
Teachers have to explain?
Explain how the learners can extract the grammar from the content they consume. How they can figure things out by themselves.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I wouldn't disagree with that. I would think that teaching grammar is largely a waste of time, but there are some useful things that you can do, and those useful things shouldn't take up more, say in a year's course of 4 hours a week. The useful things that you should do probably shouldn't take up more than 4 hours a year.
When you talk about extensive reading, nobody goes to a language classroom or a language school with the mindset of improving their reading or doing extensive reading or work on their listening or improve their writing. 99% of them are there to either improve their speaking or practice their speaking, or improve their pronunciation, which is again about speaking, or getting their grammar fixed, which is yet again about speaking. The focus is predominantly on speaking. A school which advertises itself as a place for extending reading won't survive a day. And the other problem with this extensive reading is that it's all about what you read.
Anyway, no. So your question was, was I happy about the state of teaching? And of course I'm not. And my general comment on teaching is that there is far too much teaching and not enough learning. And that's a comment which has been made. You can find people saying the same thing over the centuries. There's lots of teaching going on, but there's not a lot of learning going on. And I think teachers teach far too much. And the people teaching in it are usually not trained anyway.
But there's nothing to teach. Strip the knowledge from the language, and all you're left with is vocabulary and grammar.
Oh, yeah, but I could see things that people could do usefully in conversation schools. I could probably sit down and organize a sensible syllabus which should result in some useful learning. I wouldn't write the possibility off of conversation schools doing something useful. But I think if you have teachers who don't really know what they're doing and they're just given the course book and say, carry on, I doubt if you're going to get a great deal of success coming from it.
Okay, let me ask you one last question, if I may. If a person is good at reading, what are the chances of that person being good at speaking?
Probably low.
Oh, really? Because I think it's the exact opposite. Extremely high.
Well, the reason I'd say low, because it's the way you phrased the question, probably. But if you devote it's coming back to this idea of focus again. See, Stephen Krashen has the idea that if you do lots and lots of reading, then you'll be great at all of the 4 skills of listening, speaking, reading, writing. And I think he's completely wrong on that.
I did not know that about him.
No, it's called the input theory. And the input theory says all you need is input, and then everything else will take care of itself. Now, I think he probably no longer believes that, but he sticks with the idea because it gets attention and so on. Now, he's probably a reasonable friend of mine, and he knows my views on the subject. My belief is that if you want to learn a language fully, you've got to give attention to listening, speaking, reading, and writing.
No, I'm not saying that people should neglect the other domains of language. My question is this. Whichever word you want to use, good at, or we could use fluent, it doesn't matter which word we use to describe reading. If a person is able to read fluently, what are the chances of that person being able to speak fluently?
Well, it comes back to focus again.
No. My question is about the correlation.
So, does your question mean what transfers from reading to listening?
Exactly, to speaking.
To speaking, sorry. Yeah. Exactly. Well, I imagine vocabulary knowledge transfers to some degree, only to some degree, because reading involves receptive knowledge and speaking involves productive knowledge. And productive knowledge is more knowledge than receptive knowledge. So that, when you have productive knowledge for speaking, you've got to know how to pronounce the words and things like that. You could read quite fluently meaning at a good reading rate with reasonable comprehension, but I wouldn't expect them to be necessarily good at speaking simply because of reading. I would hope that they're also getting good at speaking in through speaking classes and so on. But I wouldn't guarantee
this is a no-brainer. It's common sense. It's true about our native language, let alone a foreign language. If a person is able to read fluently, whether out loud or silently, if a person could read smoothly, accurately, easily, with proper pronunciation and fewer pauses, with no mistakes, wouldn't you deduce that that very same person would also be able to speak smoothly, accurately, with fewer pauses? I'm not talking about being an orator, giving public speeches for hours on end. I'm talking about being able to carry on a face-to-face conversation on a familiar topic. We are not talking about being a public speaker, giving public speeches.
No, I wouldn't agree.
I'm talking about having a normal conversation.
No, I wouldn't agree. I wouldn't agree with that. I'll give you an example.
Really?
No, I'll give you an example from my own experience in Japan. We got on a train once to go from very first time in Japan to go from Kyoto to Osaka, and so we did first visit to Japan, virtually no Japanese or anything like that, and so we got on this train. I'm not sure if it's the right train or not, but there was a very scholarly looking woman, probably teenage, probably about 19, 20 or something like that, sitting there. And so I asked her, I said, is this the train to Osaka? And I said it like that because I thought, and she looked at me and went, and buried her face in her hands. And then a man in front of her said, yes, Osaka. Okay, so the train goes along. And as the train's going along, this is a local train, we're not on the Shinkansen, she pulls a book out of her bag and starts reading without a dictionary. And anyway, being a nosy teacher, I'm sitting in the same row, I accidentally drop my pencil on the floor, and I bend down to pick it up, and I look at at the title of the book she's reading. And the book is called The Macroeconomics of Agriculture, written in English. Okay? And so anyway, so here we are. She's reading The Macroeconomics of Agriculture without a dictionary. And anyway, we get off the train. And after we get off the train, she comes up to us and says, "Where are you going?" Now, I guarantee she's been practicing that sentence for the last 10 kilometers or so before we get to the station. But anyway, we managed to have a very limited conversation. And she pointed us in the right direction. But it turns out that was a master's level student studying the macroeconomics of agriculture and getting ready to write her thesis on the macroeconomics of agriculture, reading this book, and I'm sure she's comprehending what she's reading. But when it comes to having a conversation, there's a whole pile of issues there which make it difficult for her to be good at speaking. Now, to say that she's not fluent at reading because she can't have a conversation would be not to give her much credit for the reading skills she's got. So that's why I'm cautious in answering your question.
Yeah, but this is extremely anecdotal. Next time you come to Japan, we could hop on a few trains and do a similar experiment. And I'm sure that most people will be able to answer your question.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of Stephen Krashen. The only thing I agree with him is that talking is not practicing. But I don't understand his idea of comprehensible input. Comprehensible means understandable. And foreign languages and comprehensible are the exact opposite. That's one. And two, I don't like the word input. Input is about computers. To me, it's about knowledge. Language is a tool for acquiring knowledge. That's why I'm not a fan of language apps or graded readers.
The whole point of graded readers is so that at every level of your proficiency, you can read like a native speaker at that level. You can comprehend, you can get interesting knowledge, you can read engaging books for the content. And it's all written within the 500-word level or the 200-word level or the 1,000-word level. It's written at your proficiency.
To what end?
To the development of proficiency in the language.
To what end? What for?
Well, because you want to learn the language, and it's a series of stage steps.
But to me, language is knowledge. Language doesn't exist without knowledge. You can't learn the language without the knowledge. And vocabulary and grammar are not knowledge. Graded readers don't contain any knowledge. People use graded readers in order to start speaking as soon as possible. Nobody reads graded readers to acquire knowledge. All they care about is learning a few words and grammar. To what end is my question. To me, language is a means of acquiring knowledge. Knowledge is the product, and speaking is a byproduct of acquiring knowledge. So why would you start with something fake?
Do you think that speaking can play a role in acquiring knowledge?
Speaking is a byproduct. We can't acquire knowledge.
Do you think that speaking can help you acquire knowledge?
Other people speaking can help me acquire knowledge, not my own speaking.
So if you ask me a question, you're wasting your time because that asking the question is not going to help you.
Your information is how I acquire knowledge, not my asking the question.
Yeah. And why am I giving you that knowledge?
Why are you giving me that knowledge? You stumped me there.
Because you asked me the question.
So we mean we need to learn the language so we could ask questions. That's what reading is for. Reading your books. Reading is the best way to acquire knowledge. There's no question about that. No?
No, but see, what you're trying to do is you're trying to say this one thing is important. And all I'm saying is it's like the 4 strands. The whole point of the 4 strands is there's no one thing which does it. You need a balance of opportunities of learning. You need to be able to learn through meaning-focused input. You need to be able to learn through output. You need to be able to learn through deliberate study. You need to be able to learn through becoming, increasing your fluency. And so when anyone says this is the one way of doing it, or this is more important than that, I say, well, it's better to see it as part of a balanced picture.
I think
so I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just disagree with your focus on single issues.
Yeah. I think that this idea that there are lots of different ways to learn a language.
No, I'm not saying there are many different ways.
Okay.
I'm saying there are many different complementary ways. So they're not different ways. This is part of a well-balanced course. So I'm not saying it's input or output, or it's deliberate learning or input. I'm saying you need all of these things. And you need them in the right proportion, and you need them supporting each other.
Why not use the word knowledge instead of input? Also, adding that vocabulary and grammar are not knowledge. Why not just use the word knowledge? Language is a tool for acquiring knowledge.
Because
why input? Why use the word input?
Because input has a technical meaning in language acquisition.
Why not knowledge? What's wrong with knowledge? Language is a tool for acquiring knowledge.
Because knowledge focuses on content, whereas the word input means opportunity for learning the language. Now you see,
we started with focus. You said focus, and I agree with you that focus and paying attention is key. And I think that focusing on input is the wrong thing to do. Focusing on knowledge is the right thing to do.
I agree with you. The 3 strands of the course.
So why use the word input? And why use the word output? I'm super against the word output. Why not use speak and write? People saying, I need to practice my outputting. And I'm like, output what? Why use output instead of speak? Why would you use output, a computer word?
Well, I hope students are not saying that. I hope that
they are saying it.
Well, they should be saying things like, I need to practice my listening and my speaking and my reading.
But even practice speaking to me makes no sense. Speaking is a byproduct of knowledge acquisition. There is no practice speaking.
No,
people saying I need to practice outputting.
You don't want to get too hung up on particular words, and these words do have technical meaning in second language acquisition, and I'm trying to bridge the gap between theory and second language, and theory and research in second language acquisition, and teaching and learning. And so I want to keep connections between those two things. So I necessarily have to be able to have both sides of the equation, the teachers and the researchers understanding what I'm talking about. But I've got no objection to saying meaning-focused listening and listening and reading, and meaning-focused.
Why not knowledge?
Because it's not knowledge. Knowledge carries the idea of content.
Isn't that the whole point? Compelling content?
Yes.
That's the product. Knowledge is the product.
I would agree with you that the 3 strands of input, output, and fluency development should all focus on using the language to either convey or receive knowledge. No argument about that. Content
receive
knowledge.
And convey, not convey and receive. Receive and convey.
Yeah.
The other is important.
It does matter.
No, it matters, because virtually everybody wants to learn a language in order to speak, in order to convey knowledge. Knowledge they've acquired in their native language. Nobody goes to a language school to receive knowledge. Again, vocabulary and grammar are not knowledge. People want to talk about the things they learn through their native language.
What do you mean by knowledge? Do you mean
knowledge,
content,
proper
or
knowledge,
language?
history, chemistry,
okay.
Knowledge they've acquired in their native language. Yeah. Smart, intelligent people, and I mean adults. And they go to language schools with the intention of learning vocabulary and grammar in order to start speaking, to be able to convey the knowledge they've acquired in their native language in a foreign language.
Yeah.
When, say, Americans are learning Spanish, they are not thinking about receiving knowledge in Spanish. They have English for that. All they care about is speak Spanish. And to me, speaking is a byproduct of acquiring knowledge. Knowledge is the product. And vocabulary and grammar are not knowledge. And that's why when people say use, they mean speak. Nobody, and I mean nobody, thinks about extensive reading when they go to language schools.
Yeah, but you can't base your theories around people's misunderstandings of words. You've got to base your theory on what the research shows and things like that, and go that way. You can't just say, well, this is what people misinterpret it to be. Then you say, well, okay, we'll try and make it clear.
That's why my first question was about the current state of language teaching. No teacher teaches that. No language school teaches that. Nobody talks about acquiring knowledge. In Japan, a country both you and I know very well, but not just in Japan, the general consensus among language teachers is that students are good at reading and good at writing, but bad at speaking. The main reason being a lack of speaking practice, no chance to use the language, speak the language. But the truth of the matter is that they are not good at reading, never mind writing. I've tested it many times. There is a strong correlation between reading and speaking. It's true about our native language too. Fluent reading leads to fluent speaking. The opposite is not always true. Being able to speak but not able to read. What being illiterate is about. But the other way around is not possible.
Anyway, we better stop soon. I think it's almost getting on to my tea time.
Thank you.
That's right. No, that's right. Well, it was interesting reading your book. I think if we talked at length, you'd find that there's a lot we agree about. But I think the main thing is, I think, with me, is that I look mainly my writing and things like that. I try and make it as research based as possible. Okay, then, Vladimir.
Thank you.
Good luck with your teaching. Bye.
A piece of advice from me. Don't ask people for advice. Ask them about their success, about their story, how they did it. You have one life. Don't waste it.